I pledge allegiance
to the flag
of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands,
one nation,
under God,
indivisible,
with liberty
and justice
for all.
Saying the Pledge of Allegiance is our way of expressing our individual commitment to our great country, America. But how seriously do each of us take this pledge? Particularly, how seriously does our first family take their pledge? And how much thought do we give to our reliance as fellow Americans on each other? In truth, all Americans depend on each other, whether we are welders, teachers, cab drivers, union and non-union alike, management, those who build buildings and those who clean them. All of us share a common bond. We are all Americans. Ronald Reagan understood very well that all Americans need one another when he said,
"It is made up of men and women who raise our food, patrol our streets, man our mines and factories, teach our children, keep our homes, and heal us when we're sick. Professionals, industrialists, shopkeepers, clerks, cabbies, and truck drivers. They are, in short, we the people. This breed called Americans."
Americans agreed with Reagan, and he went on to receive the largest number of electoral votes in history. As Americans, we are obligated to seek out the best for our country and our fellow citizens. President John F. Kennedy summed this up in his inaugural address in 1960.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
Part of what makes Americans great is that they always answer the call to sacrifice when they recognize that America is in danger or at risk. Attacks on our nation, such as at Pearl Harbor and on 9/11, resulted in immediate and strong reactions from all Americans. Americans are not fearful that a foreign country will destroy us. After all, we are the world's only superpower.
All the armies of Europe, Asia, and Africa could not by force take a drink from the Ohio or make a track on the Blue Ridge. At what point then is the approach of danger to be expected? It cannot come from abroad. If destruction be our lot, we ourselves must be its author.
Lincoln's statement is still clearly true today. America is under attack from within. Excessive government regulations and so-called free trade agreements are putting America at risk of being destroyed, and we are the author of both the regulations and the trade agreements. Our founding fathers and the generations that came before us warned of government debt and alliances with foreign powers. In his farewell address, President George Washington warned us to stay out of foreign affairs.
It is our true policy to steer clear of permanent alliance with any portion of the foreign world.
And they warned us of much that we now ignore. Thomas Jefferson also said something that is abundantly clear today.
Merchants have no country. The mere spot they stand on does not constitute so strong an attachment as that from which they draw their gains.
Thomas Jefferson knew that many businessmen have more allegiance to countries where they make their money than to the countries in which they live. America today finds itself over $17 trillion in debt. Yet our Navy patrols the world at American taxpayers' expense to protect trade among foreign countries. What would George Washington and Thomas Jefferson have thought of our American Navy's TV commercial today?
Five oceans, seven continents. Whatever it takes, wherever it takes us. America's Navy, a global force for good.
This commercial by our Navy may motivate our children to enlist, and it may give us a quick sense of pride and power. But should it be American men and women's financial and military responsibility to patrol 5 oceans and 7 continents, and to protect foreign countries from each other, even when neither country is an ally of America, while leaving our own borders unprotected? We now have 600 bases in 35 countries and troops in 140 countries around the world. How would we feel if foreign troops were stationed here in America? Americans want a strong military, and we are willing to pay for it. Americans are also willing to engage known terrorists throughout the world. But policing the world at American taxpayer expense is an entirely different matter. Americans will always support our troops regardless of their mission. However, Americans do not support putting our troops in harm's way for the purpose of increasing corporate profits. Spending billions trying to fix the world's problems has left America with its own problems. Foremost is the nearly $18 trillion debt that continues to grow every day. We owe China approximately $1.3 trillion, yet we continue to borrow more money to give away to non-Americans and to defend other countries. American taxpayers should not be required to fund the policing of the world when they can't even pay their home mortgages. Where is the logic in borrowing money from one country to give to another foreign country when we can't take care of Americans here at home? America's severely weakened economy forced nearly 48 million people to need food stamps, and countless others rely upon some form of public assistance.
For they're just not earning enough to keep food on the table. At that point, the SNAP program steps in and gives a helping hand to a lot of people across America. Some 48 million receive a helping hand through the food stamp or the SNAP program.
Our country is over $17 trillion in debt. To put this into perspective, if we were to pay off the current national debt at the rate of $1 per second, it would take us over 554,000 years to settle it. Keeping this in mind, many people say we are simply experiencing a typical recession. But recessions are cyclical, temporary slowdowns in an economy. Recessions do not put countries $17 trillion in debt or cause 2 consecutive decades of manufacturing job losses. We are not in a recession. We are experiencing what business leader Don Blankenship calls a REGCESSION.
REGCESSION is a decline in the U.S. economy or any economy caused by excessive regulations, many times the regulations that the industry cannot meet and remain competitive.
I think the word REGCESSION is very descriptive of the climate that all these regulations create in our free market system, because it combines 2 words basically, the regulations that end up creating a recession.
In March of 2013, Forbes magazine reported, small business is still in recession. The number of startup jobs has fallen 30% below the Bush and Clinton eras. The rate of new business formation in the U.S. has fallen to a record low. The reductions in small business employment in 2008 and 2009 were the largest ever recorded in the history of the United States. Early in the Obama administration, new regulations were multiplying like rabbits.
This administration has generated nothing short of a mountain of red tape, hundreds of new regulations. Of these, at least 219 have been categorized as significant. What that means is that they will cost more than $100 million per year.
So the politicians and regulators, they seem to never rest in D.C. They are writing and passing new regulations each day, faster than any of us can even keep up.
These regulations cause Americans to lose their jobs and American communities to lose their way of life. For example, logging in the Pacific Northwest was virtually eliminated to save the northern spotted owl. But even though logging was stopped, the owl populations kept getting smaller.
While the spotted owl was listed as an endangered species, its population continued to decline. Not only did the population of the spotted owl continue to decline, but of course, logging as a whole continued to decline. Communities in the Pacific Northwest virtually shut down as a result of this listing.
Drug abuse is on the rise, elder abuse, spousal abuse, alcohol abuse.
Has it always been this way?
No.
In this area?
No, it hasn't. Used to have 10 mills, churches, schools, people lived and worked, their children got jobs. There used to be 22 mills in Siskiyou County.
Now what happened?
The green movement, the spotted owl happened.
Since then, hundreds more regulations have been legislated, and still many more are coming directly from the Environmental Protection Agency.
And as of this week, we're up to 160,000 pages of rules. That's what it looks like. You want to start a business? You better read all that, or pay someone to read all of it, to try to understand it, or you could be in big trouble.
The cost of complying with all of these government regulations has made it virtually impossible for companies to make a profit in America.
No one understands better than I do as a former CEO of an energy company for 20 years and having been in a number of boardrooms, the pressures and the need to make a profit and to find ways to lower cost. But at the same time, all of us have taken a pledge of allegiance to America, and it needs to be part and parcel to our considerations of what we do.
Unfortunately, businessmen seem to think that their responsibilities to their shareholders are more important than their responsibilities to America. Because U.S. stock exchanged companies are not necessarily American companies, there is no required reporting as to where they employ workers, or under what terms, or how much they invest in America or sell in America. Companies that are listed on the New York Stock Exchange are required by our government to provide environmental impact statements. Isn't it time to require these companies to provide American impact statements that disclose how their actions are affecting our country and the American worker? How about American impact statements that explain how many of their employees are Americans and how many are non-Americans? And disclose if the company actually pays taxes in America. Senator Bernie Sanders agrees with Thomas Jefferson that businessmen are not honoring their pledges of allegiance to America.
Major corporations have no allegiance to the United States of America. Their only allegiance is to the bottom line. And if they can move to China to save a few bucks and throw American workers out on the street, that's okay. If they can move to the UK or Switzerland to avoid paying taxes in the United States, that's okay. And what we have to say is, sorry, that really is not okay.
There's a federal loophole called inversion that allows companies to do this. America has the highest corporate tax rate in the industrialized world, and many American corporations are moving overseas to avoid taxes and the burden of overregulation.
It gets worse every year. I think the business community has basically given up on slowing the tide of regulations and instead have taken up a strategy of exiting America in order to avoid those regulations.
Our overregulation continues, causing companies to move American jobs overseas, preventing them from growing and creating more American jobs, making it nearly impossible for America to recover from the recession. While some regulation is necessary, Ian Murray of the Competitive Enterprise Institute says that we have gone too far.
Regulation has always been thought of as a minor part of the economy, but it's been growing and growing and growing. It's about $1.8 to $1.9 trillion annually is the cost of regulation to the US economy. Now, when you consider that at the end of the Clinton administration, the entire federal budget was about $1.8 trillion, it's an astonishingly large number.
It costs so much to comply with government regulations, with federal government regulations, really as much as the entire GDP of the world except for 9 countries. That's got to be an incredible drag on the American economy, on business, on the free market, on people's jobs and livelihood.
Having no regulations would be like having no stop signs or no speed limit signs or no yield signs. We need to have some regulations, but we've gone overboard on them in the United States.
But because misguided and suffocating regulations persist, this is the America we now face. The decline is happening in more cities, to more industries. In an effort to keep American automotive manufacturing alive and to help save Detroit, President Obama helped to bail out General Motors.
One of the first decisions that I made as president was to save the U.S. auto industry from collapse.
Taxpayers would invest $49.5 billion to keep GM afloat.
Saving the city of Detroit, right? Wrong. The city of Detroit filed for bankruptcy on July 18, 2013. It was the largest municipal bankruptcy filing ever in the United States. Saving American jobs, right? Wrong. 2/3 of GM workers are outside of the U.S.
7 out of 10 of our vehicles were made outside the United States.
Let's think about what he just said. Since the taxpayer bailout, 70% of the cars and trucks produced by General Motors have been built someplace outside the United States. More and more, that someplace is the People's Republic of China.
We have 11 joint ventures in China with SAIC and FAW. We regard our 11 joint ventures as 11 keys to success, not just in China, but globally. Our commitment to working in China, with China, for China remains strong and focused on the future.
To top it all off, American taxpayers lost billions of dollars on the deal.
Late today, we learned that the Treasury sold off the last of its General Motors shares at a loss to taxpayers of more than $10 billion.
Yet they are making cars for China, in China, and taking American jobs with them. How is this possible? In 1994, the United States, Canada, and Mexico signed the North American Free Trade Agreement, which allowed trade between the countries without tariffs or taxes. NAFTA led to an onslaught of free trade agreements by the United States with a total of 20 countries. Then presidential candidate Ross Perot foresaw why this was not a good idea in the 1992 presidential debate.
We have got to stop sending jobs overseas. Pretty simple. If you're paying $12, $13, $14 an hour for factory workers, and you can move your factory south of the border, pay $1 an hour for labor, have no health care, that's the most expensive single element making a car, have no environmental controls, no pollution controls, and no retirement, and you don't care about anything but making money, there will be a giant sucking sound going south.
NAFTA led to America's involvement in the formation of the World Trade Organization in 1995. The WTO's sole purpose is to make world trade easier and more widespread. China entered the World Trade Organization in 2001 and committed to providing U.S. companies that would relocate their factories to China. Chinese workers who would work for far less per hour than American workers. China's unregulated industry and underpaid workers, combined with so-called free trade policies, make it impractical for American corporations to keep American jobs in America.
Today, we have fewer manufacturing jobs in this country than from before World War II. In the last 9 years, we have seen 42,000 factories in this country shut down.
American corporations are sending American jobs to China.
Corporate America continues to shut down plants in this country, throw American workers out on the street, and then move to countries like China.
More than 500,000 people just left the job market, just stopped looking for work.
The Chinese economy, on the other hand, is booming.
It's good for China, there's no doubt about that. They are using this as a way of building up their own wealth and their own middle class, and apparently more millionaires than there are in the whole of the West at this point.
The Chinese get richer, while American workers suffer. Luxury Chinese shopping malls cater to the newly rich. Luxury automakers are flocking to China to sell their high-priced cars.
Rich Chinese drivers like Ng are seen by automakers as pots of gold. 1.25 million premium cars were sold here last year.
Free trade agreements with countries that have little to no environmental regulations place American companies on an uneven playing field. Instead of standing up to regulatory insanity, these companies have taken the path of least resistance and sent out jobs to China. Corporate boardrooms need to remember their pledges of allegiance to America and stand up for American jobs. It is time for Americans and American corporations to stand up against overregulation. Despite America's 20-plus year REGCESSION, Americans are being told that even more regulations are needed. We are told we must endure more job losses and higher electricity bills in order to control the temperature of the Earth and to prevent doomsday. Doomsday predictions such as global warming are not new to Americans, though. For example, we were told in 1988 that killer bees were invading America.
Traveling in massive swarms, they seem to be heading here. Giant killer bees.
We have been told to expect more hurricanes in the Atlantic, but incidences of hurricanes are at record low numbers. The last major hurricane to make landfall in America was Hurricane Wilma in 2005.
There hasn't been one since. There have been little ones that have done localized damage, and that has happened all the way through the record.
We had no major Atlantic hurricanes whatsoever last year.
We have been told that temperature is going to rise and cause catastrophe, such as rising oceans. We are told
the ice is melting. The seas are rising.
But the ice isn't melting.
In the Antarctic, the extent of sea ice a few days ago reached a new record high for the satellite era.
And the media help sell us and our kids these mythical stories, such as killer bees and ice ages and increases in hurricanes and rising temperatures being caused by us, seemingly without any regard for the nonsensical regulations these myths promote and the resulting suffering the regulations cause Americans.
You got to do something to make it jazzier, to sell the story, which Al Gore is doing, to make it sound like it's a climate crisis. We must do something now. Even though almost 10 years ago he said we had 10 years to solve this problem. Well, in those 10 years, there's been essentially no global warming.
In fact, the temperature hasn't risen in 17 years, and much of the data published by the United Nations has been shown to be erroneous. In the past, we were told that an ice age was coming and that glaciers would slide across North America, killing all of us.
Well, but if we go back to 1970, the fear then was, of course, global cooling.
There have been no glaciers sliding across North America killing people. We are told all sorts of things which are just not true. Despite all the false warnings of the past, Americans still want to believe their government leaders, and they want to do the right thing. The right thing is to protect America, not to change America, nor to be blindly loyal to politicians that claim they can control the Earth's temperature. It's scary to see celebrities teaching young Americans to pledge allegiance to Barack Obama instead of to America, as we see in this advertisement.
I pledge. I pledge. I pledge.
I pledge to be of service to Barack Obama. To be the change.
To be the change.
What's your pledge?
What's your pledge?
I know you got a pledge. What's your pledge?
You got a pledge?
What's your pledge?
I pledge
to be a servant to our president
and all mankind. Because together we can, together we are, and together we will be the change that we seek.
If that isn't frightening enough, these young children are being taught in school to sing the praises of Barack Obama instead of America. Americans don't believe in pledges to kings. They believe in pledges of allegiance to their country. Americans will only end the REGCESSION by abandoning doomsday-based regulations and instead have practical, meaningful regulations that give American workers a chance to compete. By pledging our allegiance to America and to other Americans, not to political sorcerers. By defending America, not the entire world. And by investing in America, not in Asia. Americans are being duped by the mother of all hoaxes. A hoax that claims Americans, who are only 4% of the world's population, can change the temperature of the Earth by surrendering their jobs, their way of life, and their children's futures.
The world is getting warmer. Carbon dioxide is a very strong greenhouse gas.
Multinational corporations use it to market their products. It's sometimes used to scam Americans. And the United Nations sees it as a way to transfer American jobs and paydays overseas. President Obama and many members of Congress are more than willing to send your job to another country today, as they claim that it will prevent the Earth from overheating 100 years from now. The myth this time is not killer bees or a coming ice age. It's man-made global warming.
We will respond to the threat of climate change.
For politicians to say that they can control the Earth's temperature is tantamount to political sorcery. The American politicians' green movement is making other countries, especially China, richer. But the REGCESSION in America continues to get worse.
We, the people, the masses, we are getting worse off.
President Obama's policies are sending jobs overseas, taking away good-paying jobs in this country and sending them elsewhere.
In stark contrast to JFK, President Obama is not simply asking Americans to sacrifice for their country. He is actually forcing them to sacrifice.
Under my plan of a cap and trade system, electricity rates
would necessarily skyrocket. Even, regardless of what I say about whether coal is good or bad, because I'm capping greenhouse gases, coal-powered plants, natural gas, you name whatever the plants were, whatever the industry was, they would have to retrofit their operations. That will cost money. They will pass that money on to consumers.
At the same time, the idling of American plants by the EPA is actually increasing worldwide pollution of truly toxic emissions. By idling plants here that Americans have spent billions to make environmentally friendly, only to have these plants replaced in Asia by plants without pollutant controls.
We're sending those manufacturing jobs overseas, specifically to China, where they don't do things as well as cleanly as we do in America.
American taxpayers have been bilked of billions of dollars to reduce pollution in America, only to have it sent overseas.
The American taxpayer paid billions of dollars to almost rid itself of sulfur emissions and particulate emissions and mercury emissions and so forth, only to have those same factories forced out of the country where those pollution controls are not now in place. So the same product is being produced in another country with foreign labor, unregulated labor to a great extent, and unregulated industry. And so pollution went up in addition to the loss of the American jobs.
Of course, many of these Asian plants also emit more CO2 than would American plants. So it's clear that those that support this destruction of American jobs are not doing so to improve the world's environment. But if anyone dares to raise questions about global warming or about whether American jobs should be sacrificed by our government, President Obama is quick to call them names and poke fun at them.
But I don't have much patience for anyone who denies that this challenge is real. We don't have time for a meeting of the Flat Earth Society.
Like Lincoln warned, America is under attack from within. Ironically, the facts make it clear that the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency is causing more worldwide pollution, destroying American jobs, and even putting America itself at risk. We'll take a look at what politicians who practice political sorcery and who seemingly want to rule the world rather than govern America are doing to American workers and America itself. And finally, what can be done to end the REGCESSION? In 1990, Congress dramatically revised and expanded the Clean Air Act, providing the EPA even broader authority to create and enforce regulations reducing air pollutant emissions, or anything deemed a contributing factor to global warming.
EPA is releasing a proposal to cut harmful carbon pollution from our nation's largest source, power plants.
The EPA continues to prevent the generation of low-cost electricity in America, even though electricity usage is a key measure of an economy's growth and in the quality of life of its people. Incredibly, in the 24 years since the Clean Air Act was enacted, demand for electricity by industry in America has not increased at all. China, on the other hand, has seen its industrial electricity demand increase by nearly 800% in that same time period. What's really clear isn't that the world temperatures are rising, but rather that the quality of life in China is improving, and that in America, it is not improving at all.
If current trends continue, a decade from now, China will have some 200 cities with populations over 1 million and 8 megacities with more than 10 million.
While China's cities are growing, our cities are in decay. Since the passage of the Clean Air Act in 1990, many Detroit factories closed, and the city ran up $8 billion in debt. The combined effect destroyed the city. In fact, the quality of life in most of America has not improved since the Clean Air Act passed. Despite this, President Obama and many politicians continue to be more focused on the myth of global warming and passing more regulations than on improving the quality of life of Americans. But even if he believes in global warming, his policies are misguided and are actually increasing worldwide CO2 emissions. These same policies are a key reason why China is growing so rapidly. With this growth, China has increased their CO2 emissions 400% since 1990, while American CO2 emissions have not increased at all. In addition to the over $17 trillion U.S. national debt, and the loss of millions of manufacturing jobs. We see further proof of the decline in the American quality of life, in the workforce participation rate, and even in the average age of cars that Americans drive. Despite the ongoing decline in the American quality of life, our leaders focus on economic growth in foreign countries. It seems that once American policies and American sacrifices have raised the quality of life in Asia, Americans will then be required to sacrifice to raise the quality of life in Africa.
It's time for a new model of partnership between America and Africa. A partnership of equals that focuses on African capacity to solve problems and on Africa's capacity to grow. And that's why we're here. Africa's rise means opportunity for all of us.
All of us except American workers, that is. Essentially, President Obama and the politicians intend to continue authoring the destruction of America and the destruction of Americans' quality of life. They do all this under the guise of preventing global warming, as they rely on lies and misinformation, such as the claim that 97% of scientists agree that global warming is being caused by man and that it will be catastrophic. And they don't even allow the true story to be told.
Some stories don't have two sides. Some stories are simply true. There's no necessity to give equal time to the quote-unquote other side. One of these is climate change.
You don't need people's opinions on a fact.
Between 95 and 97% of scientists agree that climate change is happening now.
Lord Christopher Monckton served as the science advisor to Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher.
I got the original data file compiled by the authors of the paper in which they claimed a 97.1% consensus, and only 64 out of 11,944 papers, that's 0.5%, were marked by them as representing that consensus. They reported it as 97.1. It is one of the largest, I cannot think it was accidental, errors ever made in science.
In other words, the claim that 97% of climate scientists agree that man is causing catastrophic global warming is a lie. But global warming alarmists don't always lie. Sometimes their predictions are just wrong. In 2007, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change predicted catastrophic losses in Antarctic ice levels. But in 2013, it was at a record high.
The sea ice around Antarctica is growing in recent years at a rate equal to the size of the state of Connecticut every year.
In fact, during December 2013, a Russian research vessel that had been chartered by global warming scientists to prove the ice was melting became stuck in Antarctic sea ice. All of the global warming scientists had to be rescued from the stuck vessel. The IPCC went on to predict that the number of major hurricanes would increase and that the temperature would rise by 0.13 degrees Celsius per decade, but that hasn't happened.
Sometimes I wonder if they even know the weather or if they just don't care. They're just going to say it anyway and try to get away with it. Because you tell a lie long enough, people start believing it.
Unfortunately for the American workers, the Chinese have not started believing the lie.
You know, China has refused to sign on to all these greenhouse gas regulations because they say that would kill our economy.
The recession caused by these excessive regulations is killing our economy. The EPA is taking aim at America's power industry, particularly the use of coal for electrical generation.
The fact that the EPA seems to have targeted our power industry, and especially the coal industry, that should be very concerning to every American.
Despite 25 years of recession, the EPA just will not stop putting Americans out of work, as more and more regulations are still being planned that will cost more American jobs. The EPA calls coal the dirtiest of fossil fuels, but American power plants burn it cleaner than anywhere else in the world. In spite of this, the EPA continues to abuse its regulatory authority.
The time for climate action is now.
Administrator McCarthy's plan for immediate action is destroying the livelihoods of American workers.
In the end, most people here will not wonder or care what happens to my wife and kids if I no longer have a job. No one is thinking about the burden my family and my co-workers will face if we no longer have a job.
President Obama wants to dramatically decrease the use of coal in America and further hurt Americans with higher electricity prices.
Under my plan of a cap and trade system, electricity rates would necessarily skyrocket.
This translates into an all-out war on American coal, our most abundant source of clean, cheap energy. The administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency, Gina McCarthy, admitted this to Bill Maher.
Last week announced, I think it was called the Clean Power Program. Some people called it a war on coal. I hope it is a war on coal. Is it?
Actually, EPA is all about fighting against pollution and fighting for public health. That's exactly what this is.
But is it just a war on American coal? Since 1990, Chinese coal production has increased over 350%, while American coal production has remained steady. If CO2 and the use of coal were truly a threat to the environment, then we surely should not be exporting our CO2 emissions to China, who burns almost as much coal as the rest of the world combined. This chart makes it clear that the EPA has declared war on only American coal and American coal workers. The unions tell their members that they are fighting for them. Why then have the United Mine Workers supported 3 anti-coal presidential candidates in succession? Al Gore, John Kerry, and President Obama, who are destroying not only American coal miners' jobs, but millions of American jobs. UMWA President Cecil Roberts staged his arrest in August of 2014 while protesting the EPA's war on coal in Pittsburgh to show that he was fighting for union members.
This is an expression by the leadership of the union and solidarity with our members whose jobs are on the line, their health care is on the line, their pensions are on the line.
Cecil Roberts must think his union members are fools. He told them to vote for Obama in the presidential election, knowing that Obama intended to declare a war on coal.
The UMWA has endorsed the Democratic presidential nominee.
The UMWA is part of the AFL-CIO, and Union President Richard Trumka gave his and the union's full support to Obama and the Democrats.
I'm Rich Trumka. I'm the president of the AFL-CIO. And I'm a third-generation coal miner, and I'm here on behalf of millions of people who do the work of America. Our country needs leadership. Our country needs Barack Obama.
Famed union leader John L. Lewis was a Republican. Despite this, and despite the fact that the Obama administration creates a regulatory environment that sends union jobs overseas, Richard Trumka supports Obama. In fact, the AFL-CIO almost always supports Democrats.
There's not a single good reason for any worker, especially any union member, to vote against Barack Obama.
Why is it that the unions support politicians like Gore, Kerry, and Obama, who support policies that are destroying American jobs? Is it just so they can hang out at the White House with the president?
I'm at the White House a couple of times a week. 2-3 times a week. I have conversations every day with someone in the White House or in the administration. Every day. That includes weekends, by the way.
The president of the most powerful union in America is hanging out at the White House, supporting a U.S. president who is destroying American jobs, and then bragging about it to liberal bloggers. It just doesn't make sense. The unions and the Obama administration have clearly demonstrated that they are not for American workers, nor for American employers. They will not hesitate to be untruthful to get their way. Incredibly, our government even intentionally falsifies accident reports and denies American workers the use of technologies that would make American jobs safer and healthier. They hide the truth and carry on with their political sorcery. Our natural environment is very important, and Americans love and enjoy the beauty of nature. They want to protect that beauty and their natural environment. But they realize too that there is more to their total environment than just nature. Much of our environment depends on our job. A government that gives our jobs away to other countries is not improving our environment. The environmentalists claim they want us to make all of the changes they propose in order to fight global warming. But the world isn't getting warmer. They don't want Americans to know it, though. As we noted before, the media and the politicians are lying when they claim that 97% of climate scientists agree that man is causing catastrophic global warming. But the lies don't stop there. And it's not just the media and the politicians that lie about global warming. It is also the United Nations. A scandal known as ClimateGate made clear that the UN scientists were lying about global warming and were covering up the truth.
Few have browsed the hairy README file, the electronic notes of a harried programmer trying to make sense of the CRU's databases. They have never read for themselves how temperatures in the database were artificially adjusted, or the hundreds, if not thousands, of dummy stations which somehow ended up in the database. Or how the exasperated programmer resorts to expletives before admitting he made up key data on weather stations because it was impossible to tell what data was coming from what sources. Few have read the 2005 email from ClimateGate ringleader and CRU head Phil Jones to John Christie, where he states, quote, "The scientific community would come down on me in no uncertain terms if I said the world had cooled from 1998, or where he concludes, "As you know, I'm not political. If anything, I would like to see the climate change happen so the science could be proved right, regardless of the consequences. This isn't being political, it is being selfish." Or the email where he broke the law by asking Michael Mann of Hockey Stick fame to delete a series of emails related to a Freedom of Information request he had just received. Or the email where he wrote, "If they ever hear there is a Freedom of Information Act now in the UK, I think I'll delete the file rather than send it to anyone."
Why would environmentalists not tell the truth about global warming?
People are getting rich off of environmentalism.
Environmentalism is not a big cause. It is a big business.
Well, there's no doubt that the green movement is a big business. In a way, they've become what they were against in the beginning. Groups like Greenpeace bringing in $400 million a year worldwide.
Dwight Eisenhower warned us in his speech as he was leaving office as president against the scientific community that we were creating, where all funding comes from federal grants. And so that you would have people that wanted to cry wolf so that they got more government funding for their research project.
It's not just universities and researchers who are making money off of global warming. Many of the so-called green energy companies, such as Abengoa Solar, have close ties to the Obama administration and Democrats like Al Gore, Harry Reid, Joe Biden, and Nancy Pelosi.
We have found that more than 90% of the projects that we have analyzed have connections to President Obama, to Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, Harry Reid, or other high-ranking Democrats such as Al Gore or Bill Richardson, former governor of New Mexico and former Secretary of Energy under Bill Clinton. 90% of the projects that we have analyzed have connections to these high-ranking Democrats. And these are projects that have received funding through the 2009 stimulus bill.
The EPA is now going after high-hanging fruit by trying to eliminate already highly reduced emissions. For instance, power plant chemists are forced to search for minuscule levels of mercury in nearby streams.
If we have an amalgam filling for a cavity in our mouth, there's enough mercury vapor in the vapor of our breath to contaminate the sample. My question is, if the levels we're testing for are that low, who cares?
Yet in 2011, with mercury already at record lows, President Obama, who the labor unions supported in the elections, pushed for more regulations.
Emissions of mercury and other pollutants, which cause a range of health problems, including neurological damage in children, will decrease significantly.
There is no evidence that current levels of mercury emissions in America are problematic. Isn't it time to stop the insanity?
So rather than regulate us on these tiny, tiny amounts of mercury, this is just one example. I could give you dozens of regulations where we've reached diminishing returns. We can have a clean environment, and we can have coal energy and nuclear energy, we can have fracking. What we can't afford is a pristine environment. And that's what a lot of the environmentalists think we should have.
Dumping bad rules and regulations would help American businesses.
They would undoubtedly expand. They would make their businesses bigger. They would hire more people. The people that are working for them could be paid more. They could have more benefits. It would to call it a shot in the arm for our economy would be one of the greatest understatements you could make.
Much of the global warming hysteria is based upon untruths and lies. In addition, environmentalists say some pretty crazy things to push their agenda.
We know that Venus is hot because it's got an atmosphere full of carbon dioxide, and we know that Mars is cold because it doesn't have much carbon dioxide in its atmosphere.
What? Doesn't it have to do with how close Venus is to the Sun and how far away Mars is from the Sun? Environmental extremists come up with some crazy things.
Scientists in Argentina have started creating backpacks that gather cow farts.
White Roof Project is an organization that is seeking to curb climate change, and how we do it is by coating rooftops in New York City white.
If cow farts and white roofs aren't crazy enough for you, then listen to this.
It is 20 times more efficient to raise insects for protein than cattle, according to the UN. So it requires less feed, less water, less space, and insects emit a fraction of the methane compared to conventional livestock.
This means that farming edible insects could be a way to combat global warming.
To be fair, not all environmentalists want us to capture cow farts or eat bugs. Many of them are for more reasonable changes, such as wind or solar energy. But we cannot reliably supply all the energy we need with them.
Wind and solar energy require backup because we as Americans expect to flip the light switch. We expect the lights to go on. In the winter, we expect the heat to work. In the summer, we expect the air conditioning to work. However, when you look at wind and solar, it is intermittent. So often in the cold of the winter or the real heat of the summer when there's no breeze, wind doesn't work and solar doesn't work in the winter. So because of that, those green energy sources require backup. Natural gas is the most effective backup.
America had 129.4 trillion cubic feet of proven shale natural gas reserves in the year 2012. This is enough natural gas to fuel our energy needs for many years into the future.
Fracking has dramatically increased energy production.
With such an emphasis on stopping the American use of coal, one would think that the environmentalists would applaud the use of natural gas, which is known as a much cleaner fuel than coal.
You know, the environmentalists act like they're against coal, and if they can kill coal, they're going to be happy. That's not the case. And you know, they've moved on and they'll continue to move on. Most recently, they've come out against fracking.
The environmentalists have already started to sue the fracking industry, indicating once again that environmentalism is a big business, not a big cause.
You know, I was amazed when I heard that Aubrey McClendon, former CEO of Chesapeake Energy, donated $50 million to the Sierra Club for a campaign to kill coal. When I heard that, I yelled at the television and I said, "You fool, you are going to be next." And it wasn't 3 months later that the Sierra Club launched their Beyond Natural Gas campaign.
Once the environmentalists exhaust the money supply of the fracking industry, they will go after green energy sources. In fact, they already are. Recently, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service allowed wind energy farms to apply for special permission to kill the bald eagle, our national bird.
If you are a favored industry, such as a wind turbine manufacturer or an industrial wind plant, you now have authority from the U.S. government. You can get a 30-year permit to kill bald and golden eagles. And the American Bird Conservancy estimates that since 1980, 2,000 to 3,000 bald and golden eagles have been killed by wind turbines.
Solar energy is killing birds as well.
A new form of solar energy is having an unwanted side effect. It's making some birds ignite in mid-air. California's Energy Commission is studying the issue of bird deaths at a new kind of solar plant in the Mojave Desert.
Al Gore, John Kerry, and Barack Obama support the environmentalists. Big Labor supports Gore, Kerry, and Obama. Environmental extremists are demanding even more nonsensical regulations be placed on American employers while China continues to grow its economy and take away American jobs.
为什么强大的国家都会走向灭亡呢？古希腊、罗马帝国、不列颠帝国、 美国，因为他们都犯同样的错误，与原来使得他们成功的原则背道而驰。美国政府企图以庞大的开支和税收来摆脱严重的经济衰退，巨额的所谓刺激开支，庞大的医疗改革，政府接管私有企业，债务累累。当然，我们是他们的大债主，现在他们都得给我们干活。
You can change the future. You have to.
China, without the suffocating burden of debt and overregulation, can produce goods cheaper than America, and their development and economy are booming.
It's Friday night in Beijing, and the rich young things have come out to play.
So what do they do with all of our cash? For starters, they make really cool stuff. Where is the biggest dam in the world?
From the waters of the Yangtze River in China rises the biggest concrete structure on the planet.
Three Gorges produces power equivalent to 20 times that of a typical nuclear power plant, and 18 times the power of America's iconic Hoover Dam. The two countries' differences aren't surprising when you realize China is building up and maintaining their infrastructure with 9% of their GDP. Meanwhile, our infrastructure is crumbling.
Like in 2007 when the I-35 West Bridge in Minneapolis collapsed, dumping cars into the water and killing 13 people. Or last year when a tractor-trailer crash destroyed a bridge on a major route between Seattle and Canada.
China is producing an amazing array of mega projects for their infrastructure. Projects like the 2,073-foot-tall Shanghai Tower, which is taller than any building in America. The Wuhan Road and Rail Bridge over the Yangtze River, which is the longest combined road and rail cable-stayed bridge in the world. And the $1.2 billion, 250-mile-per-hour Shanghai Trans-Rapid Train, which runs between downtown and the airport. The 15.8-mile-long Shanghai Yangtze River Tunnel and Bridge is one of the longest in the world and cost $1.84 billion to build. If that's not impressive enough, there's the Wuhan Railway Station, which serves a network of bullet trains that are capable of reaching speeds of over 300 miles per hour. These trains enter and leave the station every few minutes. What else are they doing with all of that cash? China's newfound success from the gift of American jobs is also funding a huge expansion of the Chinese military. China has recently completed an aircraft carrier and next-generation stealth fighter. Chinese innovation is sending us a message.
There is a place not for discontent, not for resentment, but rather for being spurred to realize, they can do this. We ought to be able to do this too. We could be having much more rapid economic growth than we are if we were free to pursue it, more free than we are because of environmental overregulation.
It's time to stop worrying about carbon dioxide and get on with the job of making this world a better place for people and the environment with some reason behind it. Not with this fantasy of some world that has no mining in it or some world that has no energy in it. This is not possible. We are living, breathing human beings, and we need food, energy, and materials every day in order to survive.
So anything that hurts the economy hurts the American worker. So you got to think in big terms that environmental regulations in general, while maybe originally well-intentioned to try to protect the environment, they end up going overboard and ultimately destroying jobs.
If we don't go beyond what we are being told, if we don't realize that free trade agreements put America at a disadvantage, our jobs will continue to be shipped to countries like China that don't overtax or overregulate business.
It's good for China, there's no doubt about that. They are using this as a way of building up their own wealth.
The American dream is being eroded by abusive and excessive government regulation, corporate greed, union misrepresentation, environmentalists, and a president whose priority is supposed to be protecting and improving the lives of Americans. yet instead is hurting Americans.
Can we make a difference? Can we turn back? Well, even though I ask myself that question regularly, what keeps me going on a daily basis is the hope and the belief that yes, we can do that.
Ronald Reagan's words from 1981 echo the challenge Americans now face.
We, as Americans, have the capacity now, as we've had in the past, to do whatever needs to be done to preserve this last and greatest bastion of freedom. In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
We as Americans were told a few years ago that the large multinational banks were too big and too important to be allowed to fail. Billions of American taxpayer dollars were used to bail out these banks. It is debatable whether this was the right or the wrong thing to do. What isn't debatable is that if any entity in this world is too big or too important to fail, it is America itself. Sadly, the politicians are forcing America into failure as they overregulate and destroy American jobs, and as they bail out corporations that employ more non-Americans than Americans. Corporations that have as a basic core business strategy eliminating their American jobs while increasing their foreign jobs. Don Blankenship believes every American, regardless of color, religion, or whether rich or poor, has a right to be angry about what is being done to America. Because America is our home, and we elect our government officials to govern America to the best of their abilities. We do not elect them to police the world, or give our jobs to other countries, or cause us to lose our homes, or to frighten us with science fiction. Yet today, that is exactly what our government is doing. Ronald Reagan said in 1984 that America's best days lie ahead.
I've never felt more strongly that America's best days and democracy's best days lie ahead.
What he said is still true today, but we have to do what Kennedy said. We have to ask ourselves not what our country can do for us, but rather what we can do for our country. All of us can start doing what's right for our country today. We have the opportunity to make our country energy independent. All we have to do is get our government out of the way. We can balance our budget, and we can begin the long journey of retiring our debt. We can put ourselves back to work. We can build infrastructure, bridges, dams, highways, and big buildings like we used to do, and like China is doing today. We can build bullet trains. We can improve the world's environment by producing more products here in America while utilizing modern emission controls versus producing them in other countries, often without any controls. We can provide for our homeless. We can better safeguard our country from those that wish us harm. Let's begin today by sending a message to Congress that enough is enough. Visit SaveTheCountry.com to get contact information for your congressmen and senators and tell them enough is enough.
My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I see. Land of the Pilgrim's Pride, from every mountainside, let freedom ring.
Again, enough is enough. Visit SaveTheCountry.com to get contact information for your congressmen and senators and tell them enough is enough.
Of thee I see, land where my fathers died, land of the Pilgrim's Pride, from every mountainside,
This documentary was paid for and approved by Don Blankenship. It is not intended to be a political advertisement, and it is not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee.